Hey everybody. So once again, thank you very much for coming. We're reaching to the final session for today, which is a very exciting session, not only because we're participating in this session, but also because this is the first time that we're hosting a session on secondhand clothing. So it's a great demonstration of the evolution of the network and the kind of research field that we've been researching. And without further ado, I want to start. So the first research is by me and Dr. Ori Sharon. I'm not going to present myself again, don't worry, but I know. But of course.
Why not? Do that again.
I feel like by now I should test you.
Hi, I'm Ori Sharon. I'm an environmental law and policy professor at Bar-Ilan University. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. So our research is about the sustainability paradox of secondhand fashion and basically examine whether secondhand clothing is promoting sustainability goals or maybe undermining sustainability goals. So, as we all know, secondhand clothing is being framed as a perfect solution to reduce waste, extend garment lifespan, and lower the environmental cost of the fashion industry. So when we think about sustainability, especially sustainable fashion, the first thing that comes to mind is always secondhand clothing, right? It's kind of presented as the golden solution. And as an evidence of that, even fast fashion brands such as H&M, Zara, and even Shein have started to use resale as a new strategy to promote their sustainability goals. And you can see the Shein advertise over there for their pre-loved clothing. Respectively, secondary market has been growing in the last couple of years. Between the year 2021 and 2022, it has been growing 28%, and it's expected to reach $350 billion by the year of 2027, only in the state. So it's definitely becoming bigger and bigger market. And if you're not convinced yet, you need to take a look at the EU or the UN policy framework, which position resale as a both solution and a sector that needs to be strengthened. So everywhere you look, secondhand clothing is being presented and manifested as a great solution for the environmental and maybe even social issues of the fashion industry.
But. So as Meital started saying, the second-hand market is often portrayed as maybe some kind of a panacea for the problem with fast fashion, a win-win solution. But when we look closer and we examine it, the situation is a bit more complex. So let's look on the one side, if we look at the structural problems, we can see that although secondhand clothing often diverts garments from landfills, and we think that we save the environmental cost of it, it often it is being sent to the global south, countries in the global south, where they overwhelm local markets and also create waste problems. And if we look on the center, if we look on consumer behavior, we can see that often people donate wearable clothes simply to make room for other clothes and to keep up with trends, not necessarily because they are not wearable anymore. Many resale platforms use aggressive marketing methods in order to sell second-hand clothing, and they emphasize urgency, novelty. They discuss the aesthetic value of second-hand clothing, and we see that people have this experience of FOMO. You know, this is a unique garment. I won't find it anywhere else. We see thrift hauls, high volume, impulsive consumption that basically undermines sustainability goals. And in order to better understand the behavioral dynamics behind the second-hand markets, what we did, we drew on two platforms that are quite familiar in behavioral research and environmental economics. The first is the rebound effect. The rebound effect is quite known in environmental economics. It's a phenomenon whereby people save money or reduce externalities, and then they have that feeling that they can, now we can expand, we can buy more things or expend more money based on our savings, or maybe we can, we can increase our waste generation a little bit because we did save, negative externalities. The second theory that we looked at and we thought that could be applied to the second-hand market is moral licensing. Moral licensing is from behavioral sciences, and moral licensing is known as a phenomenon whereby people feel that by doing something good, they kind of like generated moral credits that now allow them to do, something that is not as, sustainable or not as virtuous as they would have done because they have these credits. And we thought about, let's try and apply these two platforms to the second-hand market and see what we receive. So in our research, using these two theories, these two known platforms, we ask 4 questions. The first question is market engagement. We want to know how consumers participate in both markets, not only what do they do them, but in terms of quantity, frequency, textile use. We also wanted to know whether like the stated attitudes of people, we had the earlier talk about the attitude behavior gap, so whether the stated attitude of people do actually translate into different behaviors. We wanted to know, to examine the demographic patterns in the market. How do factors like age, gender, income, political engagement affect the behavior of fashion consumption in the second-hand market? And also wanted to know whether the knowledge of the impact of the fast fashion industry actually translate to different behaviors in the secondary and the primary market.
Yeah. So as already mentioned, our goal was to examine whether a secondary market reduce or sustain overall consumption, and that was the main question. What is the impact of that? In order to answer that question, we conducted a survey on over 20,000 Americans, U.S. consumers, in the summer of 2024, asking them about their demographics, their consumption patterns, as well as their knowledge about the environmental and social aspects of the fashion industry. And the way that we asked them was by true or false questions. So we didn't ask them, how much do you feel you know about the fashion industry, because it doesn't really tell us anything. But we actually asked them a bunch of questions about the fashion industry. Yeah, exactly. Regarding consumption, we asked them about the volume, the frequency, the disposal of their clothing, the way that they're being disposed of their clothes, and we also asked them about a bunch of demographics and their knowledge. So, what did we find out? Moving to the findings, our first and most important finding was that secondary market growth does not reduce overall consumption. Now, this is a really important finding because we found out that consumption in the primary market increased with consumption in the secondary market, and it goes both ways. So secondhand often supplement instead of replacing new purchases. It's not that instead of buying something new, we're buying it secondhand, we're buying the both of them. Another important finding was that knowledge of the fashion harm does not generate sustainable action, which indicate moral licensing. And I have to say that for me, as somebody who teach about sustainable fashion, that was extremely depressing. I'm sure you all share the feeling. But no, having knowledge about the fashion industry and the environmental harm is simply not enough. And we also saw a shift toward less sustainable practice between the years 2020 and 2024. So people bought more ultra-fast fashion clothing, they donate more clothes, they dispose of clothes faster than they did before, and at the same time they bought more second-hand clothing. Again, evidence of the rebound effect and moral licensing. What else? We also saw our most important result was a strong positive correlation between how much people spend on new and used clothing. So again, with the growth of purchasing of new clothing, we saw also growth in the purchasing of used clothing. The more people buy from that market, the more they buy from the other market. In simple words, it means that more secondhand does not equal less fast fashion. The more we buy secondhand, the more we buy fast fashion consumption. How strong was the correlation? 0.58. So that's strong positive correlation. Yeah, which I just said. And we saw this correlation both in spending, in purchases quantity, and in frequency. So they spend a lot of money on both markets. They tend to buy in high frequency, and they buy in bigger quantities altogether. And it goes for both markets. We also saw that that secondary market participants buy more frequency than non-participants. So if you're participating in the second-hand market, most of chances that you're gonna buy more clothes than a consumer who does not buy second-hand clothing. That's very alarming. When we asked them about the disposal behavior, we saw that 43% of consumers got rid of their clothes because they were out of fashion or not in style anymore. They wanted to renew their wardrobe. So in practice, practice that might sound sustainable or circular, like clothing donation, became a way of renewing their wardrobe and getting rid of clothes and making room for new clothing. And again, that's 48% of consumers that are admitting that this is the primary reason why they're disposing clothes. All of those trends were even stronger among younger consumers. So the younger the consumer, the more they're involved in secondhand consumerism, but not just secondhand, but also purchasing of new clothing, with 79% of consumers buying young consumers buying secondhand clothing versus 57 of those who are 65 old and older. Younger consumer also had more unworn clothing. They bought, but at the same time, they bought more low-cost purchases. Again, singling the rebound effect. They buy a lot of second-hand clothing, but they also buy a lot of ultra fast fashion, indicating that the primary motivation for buying second-hand clothing might won't be sustainability necessarily, but maybe it's something else. Maybe the low prices, maybe the FOMO, as Uri mentioned. And for older consumers, we found out that they buy fewer items and they are willing to spend more per item. But again, sustainability is not the main motivation. A lot of them, when we asked them about their attitude towards sustainability, a lot of them were actually quite against sustainability or sustainable fashion. But still, they buy less clothes, and they're willing to pay more for their clothes. So it's not because of sustainability oriented, but good enough. We saw the same patterns among consumers with high income. They tend to spend more on both new and used clothing, again, evidence of the rebound effect and moral licensing. And they tend to report shortened garment rotation, meaning using their clothes for a shorter time, and discard them when they're in good condition. They also had high-income consumer also had high knowledge on the environmental harm of the fashion industry. So they do know that this is a very polluting and harming industry. But at the same time, still they tend to dispose their clothes faster and at a good condition. So it's not about knowledge. I know, very depressing. As far as gender, we saw that women purchase more frequently and in higher volume than men in both markets. Again, evident of the rebound effect. They also showed more sustainability attitude. They were more pro-sustainable fashion, and they show greater environmental knowledge. So they were more aware and more pro-sustainable fashion. and they were more likely to repurpose clothing, so to dispose them in a more responsible kind of way. But still, when we examined the overall environmental footprint, they had higher overall environmental footprint. Why? Because of the volume of consumption. Because they buy, simply put, because they buy more clothes than men. Again, in both markets. I'll try to do it fast.
It's yours. So, so that this slide captures one of the most unexpected findings that we had in the study. We found a negative correlation between environmental knowledge and sustainable purchasing behavior. We saw that, and in other words, as Meital described several of these findings, but we see that the more people knew about the environmental harms of fashion, the more they tended to consume, which is quite, that's kind of, alarming and sad. And that basically highlights the gap between knowing and doing, and also kind of highlights the moral licensing issue that people know, but they purchase on the second-hand market, and then they feel that, they have this credit to behave as they want. And sustainability knowledge, showed the statistically significant but small negative correlation with sustainable actions, while the effect size is modest and should be interpreted with caution. The direction of the relationship is nonetheless noteworthy. Just before we wrap up and a bit like starting the discussion, I want to say what's really interesting here in my view is that usually what we know about the rebound dynamics is, and it happens in many markets, we find rebound dynamics in many markets, but what's interesting here especially, that usually what we'll expect to find in environmental economics in other studies is that as the rebound effect reduces, the gains from environmental services or sustainability behavior. But here what we see is that the two markets complement each other, and what we get is a more negative externalities instead of somewhat of a reduction in the positive externalities that we would want to find or expect to find. What we find that in the end, that even if we look at the disposals of second-hand garments, of primary market garments, what we see that there's the people basically dispose them to make room for for new garments. What we also see, the second-hand market, the second-hand fashion market operates with the same logic of the fast fashion, with the rapid turnover, trend responsiveness, low cost accessibility, and what we think about it, and our basic understanding of it is that if it's left unregulated, then we have a problem. If we only discuss it in terms of behavior and what should be the moral act, then we have a problem. We find ourselves undermining that market, basically undermining the sustainability goals that we think it's supposed to serve. I said that. Yes.
So coming to our final slide, what do we need to do now and how do we need to talk about policy? Obviously, the main conclusion is that we need to have policy that addressing both primary market but also secondary market. We can continue to assume that resale necessarily means sustainability. It's not always sustainable, and it can definitely generate overconsumption. We know it now. So how does regulation on the secondary market should look like in a nutshell? We're talking about regulation that require disposal rates, basically disclosure on disposal rates, shipping emissions, marketing strategies that promote overconsumption, and mainly, if I need to summarize it into one key takeaway, is we need to start having this conversation on the environmental impact of secondhand clothing and implement that kind of conversation into policy on both markets. So Thank you very much. And if you're curious about reading the full research that was just published in a scientific report, exactly. So, yeah, we have 5 minutes of questions, maybe even 4, but that's my fault. Yeah.
Excellent presentation. Congratulations on the research being published. Can you speak about those 1,000 or so subjects? How you conducted your research?
Yeah. So it was conducted through a third-party company that helps conduct research. We had participants from all 50 states, from ages of 18 till 75. With I think it was 47 men and 53% women. Mm-hmm. So representative of the state consumers. And in the following research, which we're working on now, we're comparing between consumers from different regions of the states and with different political oriented.
Oh, interesting.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Did you consider including younger shoppers?
Yes, but it didn't. It wasn't approved by the IRP, and I don't wanna. I mean, it's not that it's not approved, but it's more complicated to have consumers which are minors. So.
Did you get a sense of how they're consuming secondhand? Just thinking, you had some screenshots of ThreadUp and Poshmark. Are you able to say who's thrifting in person versus online?
Yeah, you want to take it? Yes, definitely. We ask them about not just how much they consume, but also what are the origins of their consumer. Purchasing online, purchasing secondhand online, purchasing in physical stores, purchasing in upcycled stores, and so and so. One of the main drivers of this overconsumption is digital platforms, of course.
So you said that the young consumers buy more fast fashion, and that this is done even if you have knowledge about how harmful it is.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you tried to do an interaction of age versus knowledge, and see if maybe something changes over time, over generations.
Definitely, it's one of the findings. Generally speaking, knowledge wasn't a good indicator to.
No, but I mean age and knowledge together, and maybe finding that people with higher knowledge do tend to, considering their age, tend to shop less.
Reverse, no?
We saw that, but with older population, we saw them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but with knowledge.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, the group that had the highest knowledge, but at the same time the highest rate of purchasing from both market was students, and mainly young students. So it's kind of give you a clue.
Yeah.
And I think we have time for one
We
more
have a lot of questions like that.
So, Madison Mavis, you want to ask your question?
Got 6 messages.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi. Sorry, I am obsessed with your study. Thank you for publishing it. And I'm so curious because we've been seeing a lot of research from Depop saying that 3 out of 5 of their purchases placed on their platform are displacing new purchases, but clearly your study would prove the opposite. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I don't think I need to answer that question. No, because I think it's evident. I mean, in the end of the day, obviously, if you're a for-profit entity, then research looks different.
Yeah, but also I would say that I don't know how can they measure it, because there are different different companies, different forums when you can purchase it. Even if I purchase secondhand on one platform and I can buy primary on another platform, how would you know? right? So I really don't understand how they made that research. I would be happy to look at it.
Well, they're all using the same research group. They're all paying the same research.
All right, so we're gonna move to the next presentation.